There are many hints throughout the story that not only is the boy in white one and the same with the being who chooses to appear as the person that we know as Victor's dad, but that the entity actually has a twin brother.
I went through a magic tree. I wake up in the hospital. You just happen to be here. No. We're not really in condemnation, are we? It's just more of this place.
She was the one who had been chosen to free the children. But you've been chosen now, too. How did you get out?
What we see here when Tabitha was in Camden, Maine is one of the biggest signs that the manipulation by the entity in control of the monsters is actually way worse than we previously believed. Because what I want you to focus on here is that the boy in white who Tabitha sees in Camden, Maine is clearly not the same boy in white that we have been seeing throughout the story. And this is just one of many obvious clues that the boy in white actually has a twin brother that is competing with him for dominance over the people of the town.
The bad tree does bad things. Why won't you help us?
You need to learn for yourselves. It's the only way you'll understand.
The knowledge comes with a cost. Your wife shouldn't have dug that hole.
This scene is one of the most underanalyzed scenes, as people always focus on the wrong thing, which is Jim Matthews getting killed by the man in yellow. But what is actually significant here to me is the incredible amount of signs that show there is a much stronger connection than we could ever imagine between the yellow man and the boy in white. Like, what I want you to notice here is how when Tabitha falls into the tunnels where the monsters have been sleeping in, Victor says that it was the boy in white who told them to wait for her down in these underground caves. This means that the boy in white already knew that Tabitha had been digging into her basement before she fell into the tunnels. And this is the same exact level of knowledge that we see from the man in yellow. And this is one of many clues throughout the show that imply that there exists a rule that both of the entities who are playing the game have to have access to the exact same amount of information that the brother also has access to. This could explain, for example, how Jim Matthews only started receiving the phone calls claiming to be his dead son only after Tabitha tells the priest in Camden, Maine, the name of the dead baby, and how the old man in the dungeon already knew about Boyd's wife's belief that Fromland was a dream, just like how the Nightwalkers have been informed of the names of everyone in the town, likely before they even arrive. So it is clear that the writers want us to see that whatever one boy in white knows, the other one will also know it in an instant, possibly implying that it's part of the rules of the game that they created together. This obviously also opens up the possibility that they could literally be one being, but somehow still different at the same time. And this directly ties into what I'm about to show you next. And this is really important, so pay attention here.
About the tree.
There was this boy, all dressed in white, kept repeating, "Here they come. They come for 3.
It's laughing at you for setting it free, for bringing it back to town. Here they come. They come for 3.
What we see here is one of the biggest hints by the writers that the boy in white actually does have a twin brother and that they are directly connected to each other. Because when you really think about it, they never showed us the boy in white who appeared to Elgin in his dreams. So we literally do not know if that's the same boy in white that we have been seeing throughout the rest of the story. It's incredibly likely that he could be the same one who appears to Tabitha in Camden, Maine. But what really stands out here the most, and shows how strong the connection between both of them actually is that just like the being that Sarah hears laughing at Boyd for setting it free and bringing it back to the town, the boy in white who appears to Elgin in his dreams also keeps repeating the same phrase over and over and over, almost like he was compelled into doing it. What I take this to mean is that the entity, who is also both versions of the boy in white at the same time, is forced into giving the townspeople clues about how to win the game because it's a part of the rules that he agreed to when he was making a deal with a human to make the game in the first place. It's very similar to how he was forced to find a way to bring Smiley back to life because of the immortality deal. This brings me to something else that happens in this moment right here, which is a massive clue as to the question of where the boy in white even came from in the first place and why there's clearly at least 2 of them, if not even more, walking around Fromland.
The boy in white was trying to tell Christopher that it started with the children, but someone who loved them told them a story. The story gave them hope.
What happens in this moment is one of the most obvious clues by the writers as to the origin of the boy in white, and it also tells us exactly why there are at least 2 of them instead of 1 as is usually believed, as well as why both of them are directly connected to each other through the root of evil. Because I want you to think about what the boy actually says in this moment, because what he says is completely nonsensical. The idea that the only or even the strongest emotion that you would be feeling while being sacrificed to a demon is hope, instead of, say, confusion, rage, etc., is ridiculous. There's obviously a lot more emotion that someone would be feeling in this situation if they were being unwillingly sacrificed, keyword being unwillingly sacrificed to a demon so that someone else could gain immortality. The most obvious one which comes to mind for me would be fear. But there's something else in this scene right here that we have to talk about in order for us to truly understand the level of animosity that actually exists between both versions of the boy in white.
Hope is what sent you out into the woods that day, made you leave me when I needed you the most. It knows you won't listen. Hope is what makes you willing to suffer.
This scene that we're looking at right now is very important for us to understand what is really happening in this town. And it is incredibly important for us to understand the motivations of the boy in white. Like, I want you to really listen to and think about what fake Abby actually says to Boyd. Because what he was saying in this moment is that the being that he calls Hope appeared to Boyd as the dog to lead him away from the town and into the forest so that he wouldn't be there to prevent the real Abby from going postal and taking out everybody in the town. Basically, what fake Abby was trying to tell Boyd is that this Hope was appearing as the dog to lure him out into the forest so that the threat of being attacked by the Nightwalkers would force Boyd into falling into the stone hut so that he could bring the talismans back to the town. Like, what I'm saying here is that he deceives Boyd to bring the talismans back into the town so that Hope could once again be the strongest emotion felt by the people living in this town. Basically, what the writers are trying to tell us here is that both hope and fear are trapped in an eternal war with each other to maintain dominance over the people of the town so that each of them can get the emotion that they're feeding off of. And this directly brings me into this next scene, which is incredibly important for us to understand why neither of them can kill the other, despite how much they may or may not want to do it.
We're in the diner right now with trying to figure out what it means that my mom got out.
What do you think it means?
Honestly, I don't think it means anything. This would make us suffer is to give us hope. Maybe that's why I let her out.
It's not your fear that feeds the forest boy. It's hope.
This right here is crucial for us to understand the incredibly complex connection between both versions of the entity in control of the monsters. Because what I want you to notice here is that Tabitha's return from what is supposedly Camden, Maine, did not actually achieve much of anything whatsoever. The townspeople are still in the exact same place that they were in before, with only one meaningful difference, i.e. they now have what they believe to be tangible evidence that they can eventually, someday, some way, somehow go back home. But it's ultimately completely meaningless, as they cannot use the bottle tree to go back to the lighthouse because they're afraid of being sent into the pool like Dale, which was obviously intentionally done by the boy in white for that specific purpose. And even if they did make it there, the children aren't even in the tower. They're in the tunnels, living with the monsters. And if they choose to jump off the lighthouse, then they're just gonna die or become crippled. And how do I know this? Because Tabitha herself did not get to Camden, Maine by jumping off the lighthouse. She got there because the boy in white sent her there. Big difference. And he specifically knocked her unconscious before he got her to Camden, Maine, so that she wouldn't see the method that he actually used to do it. Just like he knocked her unconscious in the ambulance, and then the next time she wakes up, she was already magically back in Fromland. Basically, what I'm trying to say here is that showing her the way out was never the point of sending Tabitha to Camden, Maine. The entire reason he did what he did was to give the people of the town hope so that he can keep feeding off of them. And because they were gaining too much hope, the other boy, Fear, decided to take out Jim Matthews so that he can balance the scales. Because if he doesn't do that, then hope is going to consume the town and is going to be swallowed up like an idiot. Basically, what I'm trying to say here is that neither of them are ever going to allow any of these people to leave the town. And it's very obvious that they're acting against each other because even when you look at the dogs, there's only 2 dogs that we see in the entire show. And both of them were barking at each other in the forest, showing us that they're opposed to the existence of the other. That's why they do what they do. The quest to save the children locked in the tower, the reincarnations, what is supposedly Camden, Maine, Victor's dad, all of it was fake. A sham, a ploy. It's all just a scam designed by the entity in control of the monsters to achieve a very particular outcome. Like, I want you to think about this. What did they write on the trailer for season 4? Because they are making it very clear to us, the audience, that this show is made by the same people who made Lost. So we already know that there's a chess-like game being played between at least two super powerful entities, and humans are the pawns and the pieces that each of them are moving around to get the result that they're looking for. Like, there was literally also a boy in white in Lost, just like we know there's obviously a boy in white in From. And the evil entity in From, just like we saw on Lost, regularly shapeshifts and transforms his body to look like the people who have died and we have lost, to manipulate the people living on the island known as Fromville to get what he wants. Like, when you look at the very same episode that revealed the existence of the man in yellow, you can literally see that there are also paintings of what is clearly a smoke monster. And I also really want to point out that there's literally also a smoke monster depicted on the opening credits of this show. So we already know where this story is going, and we also know exactly what the ending is going to be. Like, Boyd's nickname is literally Mr. Fish and Loaves, which is obviously a reference to Jesus. So in other words, we already know that Boyd is going to sacrifice himself in the final episode of the show so that he can kill the evil entity to save the world, and so that the people in the town can finally be free. And it's crazy how people cannot see that they're using the same exact plot lines from Lost, and they're also making many of the same mistakes that they made on Lost. But I will say, this isn't really a bad thing in any way. The ending of Lost was mediocre, sure, but it wasn't absolute trash like the garbage that was put out by HBO and D&D with the final season of Game of Thrones. The ending of Lost is like a 10 out of 10 masterpiece when compared to the literal piece of shit that is the ending of Game of Thrones. And that's because the writers of Game of Thrones were specifically focused on spiting the fans by what appears to me to have been a deliberate attempt to mislead us with the specific plot lines so that they could subvert expectations in the final season, simply so that they could proudly say that we are so much smarter than all of you. No one could have possibly predicted the ending to our story. And yeah, no shit, because nobody in their right mind would ever write the garbage that we saw in the ending of Game of Thrones. Because there's literally not a single thing that I saw in that season that made any sense narratively or otherwise. Like, absolutely none of the characters or their storylines felt consistent with how they were portrayed in any of the seasons that came before that. But when I look at the ending of Lost, I do not feel that visceral rage and anger like I did with the ending of Game of Thrones. Do I feel somewhat disappointed? Absolutely. Because what we got wasn't really what I wanted to see, but at the same time, it felt to me like most of the characters ended up in a position that actually made sense based on how they had been portrayed throughout the entire story up to that point. So while I definitely felt like I wanted something more from the story, it still felt acceptable as an ending to me. When I look at Game of Thrones, there isn't a single character who I can think of off the top of my head whose character resolution made any sense whatsoever based on how they'd been portrayed before the ending of the show. But I will say this about From. They need to be very careful about the plot lines that they're setting up, because I've personally noticed many instances of them building up specific plot lines and then completely failing to deliver on them in a spectacular fashion, seemingly so that they can have an incredibly cheap twist at the end of it. And a very good example of this is how the ending of the first season made it seem like nighttime was approaching when the bus came into the town. But then in season 2, there ended up being like 6 or even 8 hours left before sunset, therefore completely falling flat on the cliffhanger of how impossible it would be to convince all of these people to leave the bus before the Nightwalkers came back to the town. So it completely missed the feeling that we felt at the ending of season 1. But they've also made other horrible mistakes which led me to believe the ending of this show is likely to be a similar disappointment. Like, did you notice how much screen time they wasted pretending that Jasper was actually some sort of really charismatic crossroads demon when it was actually just the boy in white and it's seemingly just a completely normal puppet? And another one is how they made the discovery of the bile seem like it was going to change everything. And then the Nightwalkers just completely tanked the bile bullets when Boyd was shooting at them. They also had Boyd intentionally say that he was trying to catch one of the monsters, and that plotline was dropped and completely ignored for the rest of the season. But what really makes me concerned about the writing in this show is all that time that they wasted hyping Tilly up like she was this crazy, super powerful ancient entity, and then they just killed her off, just to end up giving her screen time to some of the most useless characters in the entire show. And this pattern of behavior should definitely concern you, because it shows us a very clear connection between the writers of this show and the writers of Game of Thrones. All of them are absolutely obsessed with this idea of building up specific plot lines and then subverting expectations by giving us a conclusion that is completely mediocre in every way. It's important to understand that the lack of this aspect is the main difference between the ending of Lost and, say, Game of Thrones. And of course, it's also the difference between Lost and something like the Disney Star Wars movies. Because if the ending of From is anywhere near the ending of Lost, then I won't have much of an issue with it. Like, there was only one character whose ending I was absolutely pissed about with on Lost, and that is John Locke, which is actually much better than Game of Thrones because I can't name a single character whose ending I was happy with in that show. So if the ending of Lost is like a 6 or a 5.5 to me, I'd say the ending of Game of Thrones is like a 1, with half of that point only being there because of the CGI. But honestly, even the CGI was kind of meaningless because the color grading was way too dark to even tell whatever the hell was going on in that season anyways. However, in terms of mystery, From is the best show that I've ever seen in my life because the manipulation from the entity combined with the impossible nature to actually tell who's in control of the monsters is the most compelling whodunit that I've ever seen in my entire life. So in terms of mystery, I would say that this show is like a 9.8 out of 10, probably the highest that I could ever rate of any show that I've ever seen. Literally the absolute best in mystery that I've ever seen in my life. It's only once you start talking about these other aspects of the show, like the general stupidity of the fools living in this town, that it starts to go down. But when it comes to what's happening in From, we already know that the outcome is not going to be anything good and that we are being manipulated in more ways than one. Like even when you look at the monsters, it's very clear that we have been deceived about their true nature. And the idea that they are in control of their actions is clearly not true. So go watch this video right here where I explain how we know for a fact that the Nightwalkers themselves were actually tricked into child sacrifice by the entity in control of the monsters.